All right, 9.4 and 9.5. So using interfaces for callbacks and inner classes. Let's see if the board works. So previously we figured out how to do an interface. Yay. It works. So, but that only works for classes that you wrote, right? You can add the getMeasure method to the bank account class. You can add it to the coin class. You can force it to interface, use the measurable interface, because you get to mess with those classes. But the problem is what if you had a class that didn't use, you had no control of it, like you wanted to use like rectangles or something. You can't do that because you didn't write it. You can't go back in and edit the rectangle class. So we're going to add measurable interfaces only to classes that you can control. This is on page 398. All right, you can measure an object in only one way. If you want to analyze a set of saving accounts by both the balance and by the interest rate, you're kind of stuck because you already told it to, how to do it one way. So we're going to reset this data class, and when objects are required to be a type measurable, the responsibility of measuring lies with the objects themselves, which is the cause of the problems that we're talking about. So we're going to have another object, sort of a third party, carry out the measurement. So we're going to write this interface, we're going to call it measurer. So public interface, ran out of room. All right, I guess I'll get rid of yeah. Contain my excitement on the board working. Public interface measurer. Okay. And again, no implementation, just a method. Because it's going to work with anything, the type is going to be object. Because remember, everything can be an object. And for space, I'm just going to say object X. Okay? So the measure method receives an object, returns its measurement. Okay? We're going to use the fact that all objects can be converted to the type object, which is kind of my lowest common denominator of all classes. The improved dataset class is constructed with a measurer object, that is a sort of object of some class that implements the measurer interface. That object is saved in the measurer instance field and used to carry out measurements. So it's going to look like this. So now in dataset, public void add, instead of measurer or measurable X or bank account X, now we're going to say object X. Okay. And that's going to, so then we're going to say sum equals sum plus and then my whole if, etc. Okay? And then the dataset class simply makes a callback, okay, to a measure method wherever it needs to measure any object. Okay? So you can go find this measure class, measure interface, and the measure method. All right? Now you can define measurers to take in any kind of measurement. For example, if we wanted to make rectangles, we would then write a new class that does nothing but handle the math of doing this measuring for us. All right. Now, since I'm going to implement the measurer interface, I have to override the measure object. Now, here's the tricky part. All right, the parameter was an object type because we don't know what this is going to be. All right, in this case, we're obviously measuring going to be measuring rectangles, but the method header for the interface is an object. So, first step you're always going to have to do is cast it back. Okay, you know it's a rectangle. Okay. So first step, always cast it to the type that you're measuring, then figure out how to do what kind of measure you want. In this case, let's do all right, so we're going to sort of say that measuring a rectangle, we want the area. Okay. So you have to set what the actual measurement's going to be. All right. So in this case, we're going to assume that if we're doing measuring rectangles, we want the area back. Maybe you want the perimeter, whatever. You set that here. All right. But this implements the measurer. First thing you always have to do. All right. Terrible left-handed asterisk is cast it back. All right. You always first step. All right. In using this sort of interface for a callback like this is to cast it to the type that you need. And I made a mistake here. That parentheses. There we go. Okay. So let's go look at how this is implemented. All right. So data set still sets the same way. All right, except now I have a private measurer that I'm going to use. All right, I'm going to still call add, but add now is an object type. And I'm just going to go call my measurer interface, okay? And it's going to go find it based on the type that it is. Rectangle measurer, that's the one we just wrote. First line, cast it, the object back to its actual class type. There's my interface, which just provides the method header, but no implementation. And then data set tester. This is where the magic happens. So add 3 rectangles, print the average, and I just go get data, get average. Okay. Rectangle max to figure out the maximum. All right. I cast my data get maximum back to a rectangle, and then I can print out the area of the rectangle by printing out the max field, and it's going to print out which rectangle is the biggest, has the biggest area based on the maximum. Okay, so that's using an interface. So all you're going to do is for like program assignments, you already have your measure. So all you have to then write is this little helper class, which actually defines how a specific class would measure. So maybe if you're going to do bank accounts, maybe it just cast it from an object to a bank account, and then return the balance field. If there was a coin, you would just cast it back to a coin and return the get value field. All right, so you define how the math is actually performed inside of these little helper classes. All right, next section, 9.5, inner classes on page 403. Okay, so rectangle measurer is a very trivial class. When you have a class that serves a very limited purpose, such as that one, you can declare the class inside the method that needs it. So inside of my dataset tester, I could just create a class rectangle measurer. So an inner class is declared inside another class. Inner classes are commonly used for what they call tactical purposes. It should not be visible elsewhere. An inner class's method is not a publicly accessible feature. You don't need to document as thoroughly, which you guys should love because you don't document anything anyway. So I could sort of shorten up everything. Okay. Notice here I don't have a rectangle measurer class. All right, I still have my measurer interface, which uses objects. I still have my dataset class, which adds objects. But inside of my tester, I can write the inner class, and it's the whole thing. You just throw it in as an inner class. That then says, when you come down here and you're going to start measuring rectangles, go ahead and use this. And it makes it kind of obvious as to where and how rectangle measurer is working, where it's coming from, because you're declaring it as a measurer, but it's actually a rectangle measurer. Then you add it to your data set. Okay, so oh, well, here it is. Here's that sort of helper. So that's what that is. Okay, and that ends 9.5.